Okay, welcome everybody to this webinar. Some people might still be joining us, but we're going to start now because we have a very nice program for you today. So my name is Ricarda Brauchmann. I work at DANS and also involved in the FAIRsFAIR project. And with a couple of colleagues, we have been organizing this webinar, which is the first of a webinar series for repositories. And this webinar today is going to be about the role of repositories in enabling persistent identifier graphs. And as I already mentioned, it's part of a repository support series that you will also hear more about today. So as you are probably used to, a couple of housekeeping announcements before we start the webinar. So again, very welcome. This webinar is being recorded, so we can share the recording with you afterwards, but please keep this in mind if you would like not to be on the recording, that you do so. And we will share the presentations afterwards through the Nodo. So there's a FAIRsFAIR community page where we'll share all the presentations. So these will be available to you afterwards. We would like to ask everybody to stay muted during the presentations, but there will be time for questions always. And you can also always ask questions in the chat, and we will make sure that these are answered throughout the webinar. So that's just to have the brief housekeeping, and I wanted to give you a little bit of an idea of who signed up for this webinar and who is here with us today. So I see that we have more than 100 people in this webinar, which I think is really exciting, as there are lots of events going on online. So it's really great to see that so many people are interested in hearing about PIDs and PID Graph. So very, very welcome. We had more than 200 people registered from 32 different countries, mostly Europe, but also from the US and Canada. And I've also seen some people even from Argentina joining us here today. So it's really nice to see this international crowd interested in the work that FAIRsFAIR and others have been doing. And in terms of the organizations that are represented from the people that registered, most of us are from universities or research performing organizations, so the large chunk. And then we also have quite some people from research infrastructures and e-infrastructures, and all of the other organizations such as small medium enterprises or service providers, policymakers were a little bit less reflected. So this is just to give you an idea of the people that are at this webinar today. And we hope that we have an interesting program for you, and we can exchange a little bit about the role and importance of persistent identifiers and PID graphs for repositories. And this is the program that we have today. So we will first have an introduction about PID graphs from Simon Lambert, and then Martin Fenner is going to talk about the FREYA PID graph. And after that, we'll hear from Robert Ulrich about the DataCite comments and how this is advanced by accompanying measures from Re3 data. Then we'll have some time for discussion and questions. And at the end, we'll also hear from my colleague Joy Davison from FAIRsFAIR about the recommendations that we have for you, and also about the upcoming events and things we have for you in FAIRsFAIR. So this is what I wanted to share, and then I would like to give the floor to our first speaker, Simon Lambert.
Thank you, Ricarda, and good afternoon, everyone. So, of course, I will just share my screen. Just one moment, please. Right, there we are. So I'm going to give a short introduction to persistent identifiers and the idea of persistent identifier graphs, or PID graphs, as we call them. I'd mentioned the FREYA project, which Martin will be talking about, an important outcome of the FREYA project in the next talk. Persistent identifiers and FAIR data. I'm sure this is very familiar to many people on the webinar, but persistent identifiers play an absolutely fundamental role in enabling FAIR. If you look at the basic criteria for FAIR, you can see that persistent identifiers are right up there in a very prominent position for findability and accessibility. And these two criteria emphasize that not only persistent identifiers identify some resource, but they also make it retrievable. That is, they resolve so that you can go from the identifier to the resource and be confident that that will be persistent linkage. Identifiers appear as well in the other criteria for FAIR, although maybe not so explicitly, but nonetheless persistent identifiers are absolutely fundamental to the enabling of FAIR data. However, having said that, there are many other things that can have persistent identifiers apart from data sets or metadata, and these things can be either digital objects or they can be things in the real world. So they can be even people, researchers, they can be research grants or scientific instruments. They can be software as a digital object. So if you want a survey of that, I can point you to the FREYA deliverable, the 3.1, which is a couple of years old now, so it's not completely up to date. Things have developed since then, but it's a good comprehensive survey of the situation a couple of years ago, the degree of maturity of identifiers for a wide range of different types of entity, both digital and real world. So we can see that a lot of different types of thing can have a persistent identifier. I mean, that's great in itself because it means you can identify uniquely and unambiguously and with assurance of persistence over time. But it also means that you can build up a graph because, of course, persistent identifiers not only identify, but they also have metadata. And that means that you can make connections between them. And that idea is the motivation of what we in the FREYA project called the PID Graph, a network of rich connections between many different types of entities with persistent identifiers, on top of which applications can be built in different domains to add value. Now, of course, the idea of a network of things connected together is nothing new. We don't claim that that's a new idea. Of course, citation networks are a very old idea. But what is new and what we developed within the FREYA project was the emphasis on persistent identifiers as being the primary sources of information. So rather than building knowledge graphs in whatever way you can by harvesting, for example, the PID graph inverts that relationship and makes the persistent identifier primary, and then builds a network of objects linked through their persistent identifiers. And this is explained in a paper that we published in the open access journal Patterns. There's a link to it there. So what kind of value does this enable? Well, it's all connected with open science, of course. The fact that you can consistently and persistently identify digital and real world objects and connect them together is going to increase the discoverability and the visibility of research outputs, and thereby encourage their reuse and enable their reuse. It will also enhance reproducibility by making the connections between the actual steps in the research process more transparent. It enables a clearer assessment of the impacts of research, for example, the publications or the data sets or the software that has resulted from particular research grants, and thereby helps to account for funding. And enhances the engagement with funders and other research organizations. And I'm sure these are all things that repositories are very much concerned with. And this is the kind of thing that the PID graph can enable. So just a remark on the FREYA project. This was a Horizon 2020 project, a European funded project. concerned specifically with the infrastructure for persistent identifiers, and particularly, although not exclusively, within the context of the European Open Science Cloud. The project was one of a number of projects building parts of the European Open Science Cloud. It came to an end towards the end of last year, and all the results are available, of course, on Zenodo or through the project website. And one of its major achievements was the development of the vision and implementation of the PID graph. I should say that there's what you're going to hear about from Martin Fenner, we could call the sort of global PID graph. It's the graph of entities with persistent identifiers that's not specific to any particular organization or institution or repository. But within FREYA, we also developed local PID graphs for our own particular pilot applications, which perform exactly the same function and operate in the same way and interface with the global PID graph, but tailored for particular pilot applications. And in fact, if you're interested in those applications, I can point you to these two deliverables from the FREYA project, which are our final reports on our pilot applications of the PID graph. But as I say, today you're going to hear from Martin Fenner about the general PID graph, the DataCite commons. And what about the future? Well, the PID graph was not just something from FREYA. It's being taken up in the European Open Science Cloud, for example, the Strategic Research and Innovation Agenda, which is an output document from the European Open Science Cloud, specifically mentions the PID graph in this context. As they put it, the basis for a rich searchable resource for finding and contextualizing resources. So the PID graph is definitely going to continue. And I think with that, I will hand over to the next speaker.
Yes, thank you, Simon. So the next speaker is Martin, and I just see that there's already a question in the Q&A. Maybe we want to answer that. The question is, does PID only use DOIs? I think it should say, does PID graph only use DOIs, or will it also include handle, arc, etc.? I'm not sure if this is something we'll address, but it's maybe a good question to answer. Simon or Martin, do you want to comment on this already? Yeah, thanks.
Well, I was going to suggest that we listen to Martin's talk next and then return to that question, because I think this will contextualize it.
Perfect. Yeah. Okay, that sounds great. Thank you.
Can you see my first slide? Is that working okay?
Yes.
Okay, so to quickly answer that question, PID graph is something that we built in the FREYA project, and in October launched a version which is fairly comprehensive, but is of course the starting point. And so as you will hear in a moment, there are currently no handles in there, but that can totally change, and I hope that will change over time. So that's sort of the quick answer, and then we go through my presentation, and I want to start, and I hope that you all see this okay. I think it works better in full screen. Just a reminder, and Simon already gave a very good introduction of what we're doing here, that at the end of the day, this is about discovery of scholarly content using PIDs and connections between PIDs, in addition to what we're all used to, which is using searches, using keywords, sorting results in relevancy by all kinds of things, like how often something has been cited or whatever. And this is a approach which is a little bit different, and takes advantage of the fact that we are talking about a graph, and a graph is sort of, in a mathematical sense, is nodes and edges, or nodes and connections, and the nodes are for us are basically anything that can have a PID, whether it's a person, a data set, a publication, and the connections is the metadata that say this researcher published this paper or this data set was cited by that paper and funded by this funder. So that's the very basic idea, and we can go on this in this discussion, but basically this also means we can do something much cheaper than if we are a much larger organization that provides a search service that has to work much harder to find connections between things. This slide is a little bit of a repeat, like some other things I will say to Simon's introduction. You will hear PID graph repeatedly, and I think I cannot really add anything to what Simon said. DataCite Commons is the web interface to search the PID graph, and the API that's powering this underneath is using a technology called GraphQL, and that's a DataCite GraphQL API. If you have never heard of GraphQL, then there's not much time in this presentation, but just say it's a way for APIs to interact with each other, and it's an alternative to REST APIs. It has become quite popular in, let's say, in many places. This was originally invented by Facebook and open sourced many years ago. So you will run into GraphQL in many places, but it's not quite common in the scholarly community. So this might be one of the first times you hear about this. You should get used to this. It's very possible that this becomes quite common, even for simpler queries, not just for complicated graphs. And it's a very nice technology for many use cases. So just so much. You can also just say, I don't care. I want to go to website and use a search interface. And PID graph is sort of the concept, if you will, that's driving all this, as Simon explained. To give a presentation on this in 15 minutes is not easy, because the FREYA's project spent 3 years on this, and we have, of course, spent more time on this since November. One way to do this is to look at use cases. FREYA was really driven by use cases first. So we collected a large number of use cases that are sort of beginning of the FREYA project were really hard to address. And then we built something to address those. And the specific ones I'm showing here, and I go through them a little bit in the next few minutes. We last year turned into Jupyter notebooks that sort of give you answer you the question that started the use case. And it's a variety. It's not really focused on repositories, because PID graph is, of course, a tool you can use in many different ways, and repository use cases are, of course, just a subset. This is sort of PID graph by the numbers, and I did this yesterday. That I think the first thing to note here is what entities are part of the graph. And this follows a history that probably started with Research Graph, which was originally a Research Data Alliance project, that one of the first working groups, that there are some things that we're more interested than others, and that over time this will expand. So the publications, data sets, people is what Research Graph started with. We added software, we added organizations and funders, which is sort of a special case of organizations. And I can imagine that this grows over time. So something that you don't see here is, for example, repositories. And the main reason is that, well, there's lots of metadata and unique identifiers for repositories. When FREYA ended last year, the dust hadn't settled. So there is not a sort of commonly agreed upon persistent identifier for repositories. There's a few that are very useful. And of course, we will hear more from ReFreeData after this presentation, but it's not as sort of settled as identifiers for people with ORCID or organization now with ROA. What you also see is sort of the number of items for these various entities. So data sets is mostly DataCite DOIs for datasets. There is also a small number from Crossref. Publications is both Crossref and DataCite, so DOIs in all cases, and that's clearly, there are big gaps of other kinds of publications that don't use DOIs, and that's something that needs to be added. Software currently is DOIs for software provided by Zenodo, and of course there's lots more. For example, identifiers used by Software Heritage, and so forth. So that's something that is a subset, and that's very clear. And what you also see is the connections. There's a little bit too many lines, but you see, for example, data set to publication, meaning data citations. We have about 6 million in this graph, whereas links between software and research organizations using a raw identifier, that's a very small number still. This is something that you can all generate using the Jupyter Notebook. The DOI is on the slide, and I'm sure the slides will be shared, I think, so that you don't have to sort of write this down now. And you can run the notebook and see the numbers in a few months, or you can tweak the script to generate something that looks slightly different. And this is all using the GraphQL API that I briefly mentioned before. Another way to look at numbers, and this is a dedicated page in DataCite Commons, is to look at the main PIDs that we're using there, which is DOIs for DataCite Crossref, as well as ORCID and ROR. How many of them do we have, and what's the coverage? And you see that there's basically 100% DataCite, ORCID, and ROR. In the case of ORCID, it's 100% of the identifiers, but the metadata is a subset, and that's mainly because it's quite difficult to get them out of the REST API. And with Crossref, which has much larger number of DOIs, but there it's about close to 10% of DOIs. The total number is about 120 million, and that's just something that is a lot of work and that needs more time. We also use a few other sources, most importantly right now, and it's a small contribution, Wikidata and Unpaywall, which probably most of you know. And there's obviously the opportunity to add much more. And it's also fine to add a few thousand things, and not everything has to be in the millions. PID graph is a federated graph, which means DataCite is running this, but we don't really store all the data. We don't store RAW, we don't store ORCID. We store Crossref and import them using the DataCite metadata schema so that we have a single search index, which is really important because Crossref and DataCite DOIs are very close. Obviously, DataCite focuses on data sets and Crossref on publications, but there is sort of a lot of overlap. Just think about all the text documents that people have in institutional repositories or in general repositories. When you want to search for DOI or for content, you don't really care about whether this was originally registered with DataCite or Crossref. So common DOI search is one of the ideas that drives this, and there's obviously still a way to go. And this also means if you want to add something to the graph, this doesn't necessarily mean we have to store data somewhere and regularly update, but it can also be integrated. Federated search is a very painful topic, but GraphQL as a technology can do some help in this sort of to allow this. Which means that there's basically 3 ways to sort of explore the PID graph. One is the website, DataCite Commons, and it's commons.datacite.org. And you can, in one search interface, can search for DOIs, ORCID IDs, and RAW IDs. You can go to the API directly, either with an API call, or GraphQL has a sort of built-in query interface that includes documentation and autocomplete, etc. And we and others provide a playground where you can just put your queries in there and see the results and see the documentation. And sort of based on the GraphQL API, we also spent quite some time in the FREYA project writing Jupyter notebooks and documenting them. And that's also a way to sort of explore the graph, which depends on the query. For a quick search, a web interface might be better. If you want to do more systematic analysis, a notebook that you can also rerun easily might be the better option. I will quickly go through some of the use cases that I shared earlier. This is about dissertations. This is mostly about finding content in different places. And in this case, both Crossref and DataCite store metadata about dissertations. And what you can do is do a query across both. Instead of going to DataCite search and Crossref metadata search and do similar queries and then combine the results, you can put this together. And when you use Jupyter Notebook, like in this case, you can also do additional work. And sort of the slightly constructed use case that we have in this Jupyter Notebook is looking at sort of trends in what topics that people use for dissertations. Machine learning is an obvious one where we all assume that there are more dissertations in the last few years than 20 years ago. We also have done the same in the notebook for more traditional topics. So one of them is, for example, Shakespeare, any dissertation related to that. And there, of course, the trend is less. There isn't really any trend. If you go to the details, there are some interesting findings in there, because most dissertations about Shakespeare that we know about, for example, DataCite DOIs, they actually come from Austria, and the history behind that we haven't fully explored. So this is really more about a common DOI search or finding content from different places at a single place. Again, we have analyzed this, so there's lots and lots of different repositories that provide that. Dissertation is a good example of something that easily gets lost and that we can make more visible here. Sort of a more typical PID graph output, and that's also a Jupyter Notebook, and this is sort of the DataCite Commons version, and this is, I want to find all research outputs funded from a particular funder, and then I want to do something additional with that, a second step. And in this case, in the user story we had, this is about, I want to show that the percentage of the content that has an open access license and can be reused, and the funder is supporting open science. And you see this in these sort of pie charts, that for this funder, and the notebook we have is for 3 national funders from Germany, Switzerland, France. How many outputs do we find? Are they data sets or text, normal publication, or something else? And you see this in the pie chart that it's mostly text. And then the license, you see that the green part is sort of open licenses, and you see it's cut off here, but you can go to the URL that there's about 15% of the outputs have an open license. And this is probably as much about providing the metadata in the DOI about the license, because it's optional metadata, but it's also showing there's maybe still a way to go. And this again is DOIs from Crossref and DataCite. Actually, there's more from Crossref in this case, but that gives you the idea that the PID graph is about bringing content together from different places and then doing something additional, not just stop there. This is a tricky slide. It's probably easier to go to the notebook. This is about research outputs from the University of Oxford, and what are the co-author affiliations, and sort of are there patterns of University of Oxford works with other universities together. And there's a lot of detail that we don't have time to go into, and it's also quite, this is not an easy visualization. But just to say a very short version, if somebody from Oxford is on the call, there's lots of collaboration going on, and both sort of within the UK and Europe, but also collaborations with Australia and South Africa, etc. And that's sort of the kind of things that you can also do with a PID graph, and where Jupyter notebooks, of course, are a good way to tackle this. This is now moving a little bit in direction of repositories. As I say, PID graph doesn't yet generally support repositories using a PID and standard metadata. So this is looking at content in repositories. And one question that comes up all the time, can we demonstrate that the content is reused using usage statistics and or citations? And this is an example from Dryad, right, data repository, which is providing user stats. And that's sort of the top part, and there's also the download equivalent and also citations. And this is obviously an outlier for Dryad, a highly cited data set. And what you would see if you scroll down when you go to this page in DataCite Commons is seeing all these citations in the literature and also the metadata, and you can follow along further more detailed information about these citations. And again, you see information such as license, etc. That's so a lot you can do already, and a lot more we could enable going forward, depending on what use cases come up. What we cannot do, and what we do in other places, sort of aggregate this information of the whole repository. What's the total number of citation downloads, views, for example, would be very easy once we do this sort of aggregation using a persistent identifier for repositories. Which brings me to the last step, and I think I stayed in time. What is happening next? Many things are unclear because this is a sort of many things we can do, and sort of the release at the end of last year at FREYA was really version 1.0. We touched on repositories, and the next presentation will go in more detail. I said from the content types we currently have, the biggest gap is Crossref. That's because there are so many DOIs, and that's not just integrating the federated search, but we actually have to import all the metadata, convert them to the dataset schema so that we can have a single search index. We have started working on ORCID claiming. So what is ORCID called? Search and link. You find something in DataCite Commons, you can push it into your ORCID record. We have started working on subject area classification of datasets. This is something that's very dear to our hearts because it's really, really important for bibliometrics. It's not on the typical list of FAIR criteria that people look out for, but without subject area classification, citation counts and usage counts have no meaning because subject areas are very different. And that's sort of something we know from bibliometrics in the literature, but it's also true here. And we have started to sort of encourage DataCite members to use the OECD classification, map this from other classifications that people use. So we currently have about, on the 8 million data sets we have with DataCite DOIs, there is about 8% that are classified by subject area. We hope to make progress there. And finally, by the end of this year, we will retire DataCite search, and DataCite Commons will be the search interface for anything DataCite DOIs, but obviously also for related content. And with that, I think I stayed in time. I'm not sure whether there's any time for urgent question. Otherwise, thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Martin. And indeed, perfect timing. So very much appreciated. There are a couple of questions in the chat and Q&A, but I think we'll keep them for the discussion because the next presentation is really very much related. So I would give the floor to Robert Ulrich to talk about the re3 data and the DataCite Commons. And then after that, we have time for discussions and answering the questions. So feel free to add questions in the chat and the Q&A.
So I hope I can add anything new here to the discussion after those great talks from Simon and Martin. So let me share my screen. So is the screen visible?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
So I'm talking here about the integration of repositories in DataCite Commons, or the initial support for this, together with Sarala from DataCite, and I'm as a representative of Re3Data. We are currently participating in the work package 4 of the FAIRsFAIR project, and I want to give a short overview over what's planned and what we are going to do here. So as I said already, we are participating in the work package 4, which is basically about FAIR enabling repositories and extending the certification for repositories to reflect the FAIR enabling properties, to incorporate this into the current documents, schemas, and assessment things. So with that, the work package 4 gathers pilots of repositories to work with, to evaluate the criteria and the properties that are necessary to call oneself a FAIR enabling repository. As most of you will assume, this is not a binary property, but more or less some kind of decree. And as DataCite and Re3Data are contributing here, we are responsible to make the trustworthy certified repositories discoverable and findable, and so that researchers actually can see what infrastructure is kind of FAIR enabling. So what's the current status quo? As you might know, there is the repository finder hosted by DataCite right now, and it's already supporting some kind of FAIR enabling infrastructures here. So we are building up on the works together with the CopDesk community and the American Geographical Union, where we did the first exploration. We incorporated the FAIRsFAIR project already in the repository finders tool. And for now, you can look up repositories already that are fostering FAIR principles. And for now, it needs to be open access. So you need to be able to get the metadata and access to the data itself. And also the repository should support persistent identifiers. So not only DOIs, but others are also incorporated here. And the repository should be certified in the best case Core Trust Seal. And on the other side, there is, as Martin already mentioned, DataCite Commons, and it is a discovery tool for a lot of entities in the research landscape. So as Martin told, there is the organizations in, there are the persons in, there are the works that are identified by DataCite or Graph, e.g. publications, datasets, and software. And so Commons is the discovery tool for the PID graph that connects all those things. And for the work package 4, we are currently planning to incorporate repositories here as an initial step. And for that, you see here a small mock-up of the planned toolset, so that the repositories are also visible there and can be discovered, and especially linked to all the other entities within the PID graph. And with that, there's Re3Data currently serving as a source for the repository finder, and it will be the initial source for the integration of repositories within DataCite Commons. So for those of you who don't know Re3Data already, this is a global registry currently covering about 2,600 repositories. It describes repositories from all academic disciplines, and basically provides insight on the current infrastructure that allows for permanent storage and access of research data. And commonly, this is used by researchers to either look up data or look for a place to store data, but also for other stakeholders like funders, publishers, or scholarly institutions like libraries that support their researchers in research data management. And also we promote a culture of sharing and increased access and better visibility of research data, and want to build up on this within the project here. And there are a few things we're gonna do to support the integration or the transition from the repository finder into Commons. And with that, we are extending our metadata schema. And for the first revision, we are implementing the proposed changes by core trust seal, so that the certification information is a little bit more elaborated, especially regarding the time span that the certification is valid, so that whenever you access Read-Through data, the provided information is up to date. And we like also to integrate core trust seal as a certification authority for the core trust seal tag, so that you also know that the information within the registry is provided by the authority that actually does the certification of the repository. Building up on this, we would also like to work on the API. There are multiple strings that we attach to. This also connects to the work package 2 in the FAIRsFAIR project, which is basically extending the FAIR data point and make the metadata or the description of the insights of a repository more elaborated, and is building up on DCAT. And with that, we'd also like to represent this within the metadata schema of Read-Through data, that this is discoverable on this side. And as Martin already mentioned, we want to link the repositories to the majority of PIDs in Commons. And with that, we are already collecting ORCIDs and especially RAWs to the repository metadata, and hoping that we will get a suitable data source there to foster use cases like the Fuji tool that also discovers the metadata from the repository together with the metadata of the data sets to provide some measurement for the fairness of the stored data there. And in addition to that, we also like to, or we are going to implement some kind of profile property. And as you have seen in the repository finder, there's a selection box to filter by those projects already, or by those properties. And with that, we want to materialize this within our metadata. And this should also allow for the faceting within the search, so that for researchers, it's easy just to select the FAIR enabling property, and they can then get within Commons the whole list of repositories and linked data and organizations to it. In the bottom here, you see a short mock-up of how the technical implementation might look like or currently structured. So the front end with a PID graph stored at DataCite and provided the user interface for the researchers within Commons, and then queries Read-Through data as one of the databases among many, as Martin showed us. And then Read-Through data will provide the descriptions for the repository data sets there. And with that, this will be implemented during the year and will be deployed probably in fall or the end of the year. So it's already on the DataCite roadmap. And please feel free to give feedback there, to contact us. You might do this via the repository search in DataCite comments card on the product board. So we are happy to get your feedback as we rely on the use cases from the community, and also feel free to drop us a note either via email or Twitter at support@DataCite or at info@re3data. So with that, I would like to end the short introduction in what's gonna blend within FAIRsFAIR, and yeah, give back to the chair and open the discussion.
Yes, thank you very much, Robert. I think this is very interesting presentation, and we have quite some questions in the chat. So we now have about 10 minutes, maybe a little bit longer for discussion. So we're hopefully going to be able to answer all your questions. But as Martin has already put in the chat, you're also welcome to contact DataCite if you have specific questions and want to include your PIDs and the metadata in the DataCite comments. So one of the first questions that was asked was whether there are now already reliable usage measures for PID graphs, and the lack of usage data was one of the problems faced by first linked data repositories, I believe.
I would ask back what usage is meant. Is it usage of the resources, or is it usage of what exactly? If it's usage stats for data sets, and you happen to go to RDA, there's a session on this because the RDA group is wrapping up with recommendations in a few hours. And basically, it's quite painful to collect user stats, and not too many data repositories do that. But I'm not sure that this is what was asked for. The use I showed is really traditional usage stats of how many people have viewed and downloaded a data set or went to the landing page in one example slide.
So in the chat, he says that the question concerns dataset usage.
Okay, so this is unfortunately something that only a repository can do, and it can be painful, especially if you're a smaller repository. So sort of totally unrelated to this meeting, we have another grant-funded project where we are working on making this easier, basically providing a usage stats service for repositories if they are too small and resources are thin, to make this easier, but that's sort of in the early stages, so that we have to talk again in 2 years.
Okay, thank you. Let me see. So I think there are a couple of questions there that are relatively specific, which maybe we can answer sort of separately. So there was one question which I think relates to the first question that was asked, which is by Milan, who says, we have our own PID infrastructure based on handle PIDs. Is it possible to include our digital objects in PID Graph?
Yeah, I think, yes, as I said in the chat, please reach out to us and we can discuss more. Because that's how PID Graph works, it's important that there are metadata that link to other PIDs. Otherwise, yeah, we cannot do a graph. But of course, there's many ways to do that. So for example, if you have a PID4 data set, that there is a way to link to other versions of a data set, to publications using a data set, to the researcher institution, any of that, because otherwise it's not, yeah, you can't really build a graph.
Okay, and then there was another question, maybe you can provide this for a taxonomy for data sets, whether that could be provided as a link. It's one question also by Milan.
Sure, I see that. But taxonomy for data sets, as in, yeah. Maybe a little explanation.
Yes, maybe the person that can ask.
If it's about providing a link, yeah, that's of course fine. Sorry, I didn't scroll down.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, thank you. Let's see. So one of the questions I think maybe is also interesting is somebody asked that applying for DOI is expensive, especially for developing countries. What measures have the FREYA project done to make sure that this project will not amplify unequal representation of knowledge?
That's a good question. Maybe I can give a generic answer because it's it's a complex question, which is DataCite, like I guess most institutions involved in FREYA, and also this is a nonprofit organization that works on the basis of cost recovery. And the price for a single DOI is of course kind of artificial because it really depends on, it shouldn't be much more expensive to register 10,000 DOIs compared to one DOI because it's really about support, etc. So we have a pricing model that's public. We have consortia that make it easier for smaller organizations, and it will still be difficult in many cases. And I don't think that's because DOIs per se are expensive, but there's just more overhead in, for example, providing standard metadata and other things. So again, I think that feels like an email to, in this case, Lina Kusain, who's sort of leading our membership team to figure out what's the best way forward. I mean, I think we probably all agree in FREYA and FAIRsFAIR that cost should not be a barrier to do the right thing. That of course these things cost money, but that just needs a discussion of what's realistic. And please reach out to DataCite or reach out to organizations that are DataCite members and do consortia. That there are quite a number of those, etc.
Yeah, thank you for answering this. And I think it's also nice that this question came up because indeed our projects are also often very Europe focused, and I think there's much more out there for us to do and to work on. So I thought it was a good question to address. Then there's one question in the chat that might be interesting, which is how big is the issue of duplicate DOIs? Or is it an issue, example, preprint service minting DOIs and then repositories minting DOIs and handles?
Because we haven't investigated in detail, we can only guess. Something we see quite a lot is institutional repositories putting green OA content in there. And then we often don't see that the metadata include that information, even though the repository landing page might, that this is something that has been published by a publisher, but it's also available in the repository because the author was the institution. So this exists. Not directly an answer, but I mentioned Unpaywall as a service we have integrated because this problem is not so easy. And Unpaywall is probably the best way to address this sort of is something with a cross-site DOI also available legally in an institutional repository. And I think that's the best way to do that. That's why in DataCite Commons, there will be a link if that content exists, which is not really about duplication, but is about sort of where this comes up, somebody wants to find something which can be in many different places and how to do that. We have not really done this systematically to talk with members to at least include all the alternate identifiers. Sort of if content exists, for example, for cross-site DOI, if you include this in the metadata, it's easy for everyone. But that's not really happening systematically yet. I wouldn't say it's a problem that slows us to a crawl and we cannot do anything, that duplication is so common that it's hard. I think what is trickier is versioning, that there are sort of so many different versions of things that change frequently, like data sets and software, to keep track of the links between them. That's not easy.
Thank you, Martin. I think this also relates to another question that was put in the Q&A, which is what do you think about using the same PID for different versions of the same data sets, for instance, for a monthly updated database? If only one PID is used for all versions, it may be difficult to refer to specific versions, but if PID changes between versions, the overall impact of the datasets will be lower.
My answer is this: you need two PIDs because you have two very sort of opposing use cases. One is to be as comprehensive as possible. That was one half of the sentence. The other one, I want to be as specific as possible, because for some reason I want to reference this particular version because there is something that has changed. And I think you cannot do this without two PIDs, where in the metadata you can say A is version of B and B has version. So yeah, I think that's the only way, because otherwise, as the question said, you have to make a decision which direction you go, and then there are some things that become difficult, and other things become easy, or the other way around. So more than one PID is fine, and that's of course also the idea of PID graph. It doesn't really matter. If you want to know, so there's another Jupyter notebook where we looked at, if there's 10 versions of a data set, we want to see all the citations of any version and bring them together. And that's also what PID graph, that's an important use case we have there.
Yeah, thank you, Martin. I think I'm gonna just answer one more question, and maybe we will try to then answer them still by typing. So one of the questions, there is this, where the link exists, is it possible for us to search for all datasets associated with an institution and output a list of their DOIs? If so, then what is the best approach for doing this? And also, is there a filter to filter for open licenses?
Yeah, so the only caveat is that ROR as identifier for institution is still relatively new. And we can only do this where people have started using it. And there's a lot of content out there. But if you go to DataCite comments and you go to the page for your institution using the ROR, you will see everything we find there. For example, well, particularly all the DOIs. And then it's a normal search interface, and you can also filter, well, of all these things, I'm only interested in those that have a CC BY license. So you can do this now. There isn't any development work. If you don't find what you're looking for, then this is because the ROR hasn't been associated with the, for example, the data set in the metadata, DOI metadata, or with the publication. So for example, Crossref is sort of part of building ROR, but in their metadata, that's sort of not yet possible, but will be very soon.
Great, thank you, Martin, for answering these questions. And now I would like to give the floor to my colleague Joy, who will just give you a bit of a wrap-up presentation and also talk about the repository webinar series. We haven't been answering all the questions, so we'll try to put some things in the chat. Yeah, it's great to hear that there's so many questions and so much interest from the community. Unfortunately, given the time, we have to start with, or we have to now round up, and I'll give the floor to Joy.
That's great. Thank you very much, Ricarda. I'm just going to take a very short couple of minutes to try and wrap things up. So I think from the presentations this afternoon, we can see that there's huge potential with the PID graphs, and we now are trying to figure out how best to tap into that potential. As was mentioned, there's a lot of ongoing work to try and integrate better with the repositories. So what I wanted to do is just kind of pick up over the next few minutes and just give a couple of recommendations based on some of the work that's happening in FAIRsFAIR that we think you can pick up and start to address now. So this is just a slide I just wanted to show. We had a workshop last year with data service providers to try and get a sense of what are essential FAIR enabling data services. And you can see at the very top of that is PID services. So this is certainly something that people see as a really core aspect of enabling FAIR, and something that we have to address as repositories, as a service provider in that ecosystem. So we mentioned through all of the talks that the PID graphs are really good at linking lots of different components in the research data ecosystem. So we've got people, organizations, and lots of kind of well-defined things. I just wanted to point out two things I think we have to bear in mind. One of them is to do with the outputs. We are quite good at getting our heads now around the fact that outputs are not just publications and data, but could also be things like software. Some of the other things I think we have to keep on the radar, and these are areas of exploration currently, are things like instruments, so things that actually capture the data and allow you to do things. We also have to bear in mind that it could be physical samples, so non-data outputs and how they might fit into the graph. And just to mention that there are certainly for the instruments, we know that there are RDA working groups trying to look into this at the moment. So I think those are things we have to try and bear in mind as we go forward. I've kind of grayed out the repository at the bottom of the list. Right now, there's really not a great way to uniquely and persistently identify the repository service within the PID graph. And we know that they do form a really core crucial component in enabling FAIR data. And we need to see how then the repository itself fits into the PID graph as the sort of steward of the data and making sure that it stays fair over time. So that's one of the gaps that we see, and we think that there's work that needs to be done there. Another thing I would encourage people to do as you are going forward is to kind of, again, think about what sorts of identifiers you currently have in your metadata, what do you currently cater for, and how do you actually allow them to be recorded. So if we look at things like Zenodo, we know that you can put in related identifiers and you can start to make connections. You can indicate this data set is linked to this paper, or this paper is underpinned by data set here. And I think that's one of the things repository services have to think about, is how you can start to capture the PIDs and how you can make those relationships a bit more explicit. So one of the other things we're working on in FAIRsFAIR is a framework which is trying to help people to assess your FAIR enabling capacity. And it's important to stress here, this isn't just for repositories, but for any data service provider in the kind of ecosystem. But for picking out just a couple of the key points we would suggest you think about going forward. The first is to use commonly supported PIDs. And this came up a couple of times as to whether you should use things within your own system. Clearly, if you have legacy PIDs, then we have to work out how to integrate these at some point. But if you are starting from scratch, use commonly supported PIDs wherever you can. Don't start inventing anything new. The second is to try and make sure that your repository service is visible. So as these sort of services and technologies emerge, you want to make sure that your data repository can actually be found, and that somebody can make use of the information that you're collecting. Again, related to that, we would encourage you strongly to make sure that you adopt open and community-supported standards for any API that you put in place at your repository level, to make sure that somebody can come find the information that you are providing, and more importantly, to exploit it. The last, and this is the kind of, I've put an asterisk beside the recommendation we have here, and this is coming back to that point that you should be obtaining and using a persistent identifier for your repository service. As noted, there's no real clear way to do this at the moment. Some people can use things like research organization registry identifiers. They're not ideal for everybody. We know that some registries also will allocate an internal unique identifier, but again, that's not very useful within a larger context. So this is something that we would encourage people to keep an eye on and to try and feed into some of the ongoing discussions. So as we heard from several of the speakers, there's lots of RDA working groups who are currently trying to define this area. So if this is something that you can contribute to, we would certainly urge you to do this. So as I mentioned, some of these high-level PID-related recommendations we have here on the slide come from a deliverable from FAIRsFAIR, which is that report on a basic framework for fairness of services. And that's open till the end of July if you'd like to put in some comments. So we'd encourage you to take a look. I just wanted to point to a couple of other things that you might find useful. So we came up with a report last year, which gave a broad set of FAIR data repository features, and persistent identifiers certainly feature within that, and you can have a look and see what they recommend and perhaps read a little bit further. There was also a set of recommendations to support semantic interoperability. There's been several iterations of this report. The last one just came out, I think, a couple of months ago. And again, PIDs are fairly central within that document. So I would encourage people to maybe take a look at both of these as well. So that just leads me to say, you know, PIDs are not a silver bullet. I think we've heard that, you know, the metadata underpinning these things is really essential to make the connection. So we need to start to work on the culture as well and make sure that the right kinds of data outputs are getting identifiers, and that the right things in the ecosystem are getting the identifiers as well, and making sure that the kind of things we're pointing to are high quality, and that there is some sort of understanding that you don't want to have identifiers pointing to garbage or low quality and not well maintained outputs. So there's still that kind of culture shift that has to happen. So just wanted to say that we will be adding details to future webinars coming up. We'll be doing the monthly. The next one that we have confirmed is coming up on the 13th of July, which is looking at something that we talked about today. And it's using registries to try and make your repository service a little bit more visible. So we'll send out more details as that is firmed up, but you can also register to stay informed, and we'll keep you in the loop about when things are scheduled. So all that's left for me to do is to say thank you very much to all of the speakers, and to Ricarda and Rita for all of the work you've done to coordinate this, and to all of you for attending and having such great questions. We have got a link to a feedback form, so if you have a couple of minutes, wouldn't mind taking time to do that, we'd appreciate it. And just to confirm, I know a few of you asked, would the slides be available? They will be available from the event page probably later today, if not tomorrow. So please come back and check. And thank you again to everybody for taking part today. We hope you have a good rest of your afternoon.
Thank you, Joy, and thank you everybody for joining us.
Thank you.
Is the link to the feedback form maybe available in the chat? I don't see it. Maybe I missed it.
I posted it in the chat.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, okay. So, yeah, thank you.
Thanks very much, everyone. Oops.